Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about adverbial clauses. I've received a lot of comments and requests for this topic, and finally I got the chance to make this video, and I'm glad that I have this chance. So this video is a quick basic introduction. Well, I said quick, but this is going to be pretty long, but basically it has something for everybody. And there are some aspects of this topic that needs a little bit extra explanation, like the conditional sentences and the reduced adverbial clauses. And I'm going to cover those in two separate videos later on, but now let's focus on what adverbial clauses are, how we make them, and how they are different from other clauses. In order to understand what an adverbial clause is, first we have to understand what an adverbial is. And an adverbial is basically a word or a phrase that adds information about the state or action of the verb. Now, we call these adverbials not adverbs because adverbs are just a subset of adverbials, and they are single words like slowly or fast. But we can also use prepositional phrases like at home as an adverbial to add information about the time, place, or manner of the main verb. Here is one example. He walked slowly around the house. And here we have two adverbials. The first one, slowly, is just an adverb. The second one is a prepositional phrase, and we have two adverbials. One of them is describing the manner in which the action of the verb, like walk, happened, and the second one describes the location of this action. We have another example. This time we have two prepositional phrases. Both of them are adverbials, and they add information about the place and time of a state. So she was at home before 7. Was is not an action. It's just a state. And we can add information about the state of a verb. We actually have a group of verbs which call state verbs, which do not have actions like feel or appear. And that is a different topic, and you can look that up. But generally, we can also use adverbials to add information to these verbs. Generally, adverbials give us information about the time, place, or manner of the verb. Based on that, we can easily extend this idea to adverbial clauses. So an adverbial clause is a dependent clause that adds information about the time or quality or conditions of the verb. That is the verb of the main clause. So remember, if you have watched my videos about the noun clauses and relative clauses or adjectival clauses, these are all dependent clauses, which means that they cannot form a sentence alone, and they need an independent clause to form a complete sentence. This is one example of a complete sentence that has an adverbial clause as part of it. They finished dinner when I walked into the room. In this video, I'm going to use a black color font to indicate the main clause, and the dependent clause will be indicated by red and blue colors. Now, the red color is going to be used for the connector or a conjunction that creates an adverbial clause, and the rest of the clause will be indicated in blue. In this case, we are talking about the time of the action of the verb in the main clause, in this case, finished. So we are saying when they finished the dinner, and they finished it when I walked into the room. I would have lent you money if you had asked me. This is another example. And yes, conditional sentences, as I said before, are a subset of adverbial clauses. And here, the condition, if you had asked me, is a condition that describes the verb. In other words, the verb of the main clause, which is lending the money, would happen under these circumstances. Now, how do we make adverbial clauses? They are made by adding a group of words or phrases that are called subordinate conjunctions. The name is a little bit mouthful, but it has meaning. It is meaningful. First of all, it has the word conjunction, which means a connector. So their job is to connect two clauses the independent clause and the dependent adverbial clause. There are also subordinate conjunctions. That is, whatever they attach to, they make them dependent. They make them subordinate, like the employee. So if you look up the meaning of a subordinate, you would realize that a subordinate is someone who gets orders from a boss or a superior. And in this case, we think of dependent clauses as subordinates who have to follow or must be attached to a boss or a superior to form a complete sentence. In this example, I walked into the room. We see a complete sentence. There's nothing wrong with that, and the punctuation is okay. A lot of people would agree that this is a complete sentence, and you wouldn't expect anything else added to it. But after I add the word when to the same set of words, things change, and all of a sudden you expect to hear the rest of the sentence, like when I walked into the room, and people are going to say, so what? And that is why we call these dependent clauses, because they cannot give us all the information alone. And when we put two clauses together, one independent and one dependent, and we have a full sentence. They finished dinner when I walked into the room. If you Google subordinate conjunctions, you're going to get a list, and this is one example. This is not a complete list, and there might be some other words that I may not have included here, but that doesn't matter as long as you know the title or the what these words are called. You can find a list of those anywhere, especially online. There's something nice about this. You can get all of these words in one place, but there's something also bad about it, and that is these are ordered alphabetically, which is not really helpful because generally some of these words share some commonalities in terms of meaning and also the structure. So it's a good idea to find a source that groups these together in how they are made and based on their similar meanings. And I've done that for you in this video. So for the rest of this video, we're going to look at different groups of subordinate conjunctions and how they are used in sentences to make adverbial clauses. But they will not be very detailed. And for more detail, you can refer to grammar books. The only part that I will make a video about in the future is the conditional sentences, but this should be enough for most people. Now, the first group that is used to refer to the time of the action or the state of the verb in the main clause is when, while, and as. This group they share something common, and that is they refer to the time or action of the verb. And they have some similarities and differences. And I will explain these through examples. In the first example, they finished dinner when I walked in. I've been using this example a lot, but I think it is simple enough. Here, the action of the main verb, finished, happens right after the action in the dependent clause or the adverbial clause. So it means that when can be used to refer to a point of time. So here we are talking about the point of time or the moment of time that walking into the room happened. And right after that, they finished the dinner. Or you can think of these two actions happening at the same time. You can also use when to describe a process or a period of time, not a point of time. In this example, when I was a kid, is not just a single point in time. It is a lengthy period of several years, and during that period, the action of the main clause happens. So I watched a lot of cartoons when I was a kid. In the next example, I will call you when I get there. There is a little bit of a difference, and the difference is actually in the tense. If you look at the main clause, I will call you. It is a future tense, but the adverbial clause does not use a future tense. It uses present tense. That is because in adverbial clauses, if you use words that are used to refer to time, we do not use future tenses. There are a lot of things in any grammar of any language that is difficult to explain, and this might be one of those. But my understanding is that the main clause is talking about a promise, an action that you promise to take in the future. But the adverbial clause is a condition, and you're talking about a condition that is timeless almost. So whenever this happens, the other action will happen. So the main clause makes sense to have some sort of time in the future, but the adverbial clause, because it is a condition that is true from now on, it doesn't necessarily have to use a future tense. But this is just my explanation of this and doesn't have to be correct. But the point to remember here is that you should not use future tenses after this group of words. And there are some others that refer to time, so I will talk about those in the future slides too. I fell asleep several times while my colleague was talking. Now, while is a little bit different from when, and while is used specifically when you're talking about a period of time, not a point of time. So you cannot use it like the first sentence. This is another example. Jenny made dinner while I was at work. So in both situations, in the first one, you're talking about a period of time while an action is happening, but in the second one, while I was at work, this is not about an action, it's about a state. Doesn't really matter. Both of them just refer to a period of time. They finished dinner as I walked in. So as is a little bit more versatile. It can be both like when and while. And in this example, this is more like when, as it refers to a point of time. And in this example, I fell asleep several times as my colleague was talking. Here, I am talking about a period of time. So it's more like while and also when. But there is one more meaning or function of as that really when and while cannot or may not be used to indicate. And that is a process of change. So in this example, I'm talking about a process of growing older, which is a change. I mean, as you get older, a lot of things change. And because we are talking about this process, you can use as. And as is more appropriate. Now, there's another point that I want to show you and talk about in the slide, and that is the order of the main clause and the dependent or adverbial clause. Adverbial clauses most of the time can be used before and after the main clause. But when they're used at the beginning or before the main clause, you need to separate them with a comma. But if they are used after the main clause, you don't need to use a comma. And the reason for that really is when you use them after the main clause, like the first example, we really know when the adverbial clause starts because that word in red really indicates that. But when we use them at the beginning, that word, like when, is not in the middle anymore, and we need a different kind of indicator to show where the main clause starts. And we happen to use commas, and commas take care of that for us. Now, you might ask, after, before, until, since, and as soon as all of them refer to time, why would you put them in a different group? And that's a good question. Well, the main reason for that is all of these have one thing in common, and that is they refer to one single point of time. They might have some additional properties like until and since, but they are generally used to indicate a point of time. So after I read the book, I started doubting everything. So first, the action of the adverbial clause happens, like reading the book, and then when that happens, the moment I finish reading the book, the action or the state of the main clause starts. Here is another example. After I finish doing the dishes, I will do the laundry. Remember, I told you if you are using any adverbial clauses that refer to the time of an action, When you're talking about the future, you should not use future tenses. After I finish doing the dishes still refers to future, but for the reasons that I mentioned before, we do not use future tenses. We use the future tense in the main clause or the independent part of the sentence. In an informal situation, like a conversation, it is more likely to hear once than after. You can hear after, but once is a little bit less formal. But once also indicates or kind of emphasizes the immediate start of the second action after the first action finishes. So once I've finished doing the dishes, I will do the laundry. So this is kind of emphasizing the fact that, okay, I'm doing the dishes right now. Don't bother me, but as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to do the laundry. Another thing to pay attention to here is that I've used the present perfect tense. Yes, you can use a perfect aspect in the adverbial clauses that refer to time. And we do that simply because we want to emphasize the completion of the action. We want to just emphasize the fact that, okay, this action is completed first before the second one is going to happen. You don't have to do this, but if you want to really emphasize the fact that the first action must be completed, then you can use the perfect tense or perfect aspect here. Now, the other word is until. Until is very similar to after and once. It refers to a point of time, but there is another, the additional aspect to it, and that is we can think of until as a wall that kind of indicates the end of an action. So we kind of say that the action or the state of the verb in the main clause, in this case, not speaking with him, this is going to stop as soon as the action in the adverbial clause happens. So I will not speak with him until he apologizes. Since is very similar to until, but it's the opposite of until, and it just indicates the starting point of the action or the state of the verb in the main clause. Here, the main clause has this state, has never been the same. So never being the same starts right at the moment of the action or the state of the dependent or adverbial clause. In this case, Sarah telling Jim that she wants a divorce. So since means from the moment that Sarah told Jim that she wants a divorce, he has never been the same. You will see the structure and the combination of these tenses quite often, and we use the present perfect or present perfect continuous tense in the main clause and simple past in the since part or the adverbial clause. There are some other phrases that we can use to refer to a point of time, and we can also emphasize the immediacy or how fast the other action happens. With phrases like as soon as, the moment that, the minute that, and the second that. So it's kind of like I'm waiting for that moment. As soon as that moment comes, I'm going to do something. In this case, as soon as I heard the news, I called my mom. Okay. We can use as soon as, like the other subordinate conjunctions of time, to talk about the future. You've seen this before, and this happens again and again. And as I said before, you cannot use a future tense here in the adverbial clause. So as soon as I arrive already refers to future. And the main clause already gives you the clue or the context as to when or what time you're talking about. The next group is used to talk about similarity of actions. You know that we can use adjectives or some words to talk about the similarity between words or nouns. Like you can say that John is very similar to his sister or things like that. We can do the same with the action or the state of two verbs. This is one example. I decorated the table as you told me. So as comes up quite often, and we've seen already that as can be used to indicate the time of the action or the state of the main verb, or the verb in the main clause. But here, as has a different meaning. And from the context, you can understand that here you say that you decorated the table similar to what your friend or whoever told you to do so. You can use like in this sense, which is similar to as, and they have the same meaning. And you can emphasize the similarity or the pretending aspect of two actions. So as if and as though are like as and like, but they're a little bit different in that we are talking about two things that are not quite the same, but they pretend to be the same. Like they talked about him as if or as though he was the bus. We know that he is not the bus here. But as if or as though kind of indicates that they are pretending that he is the boss. There is a similar structure that we can use these subordinate conjunctions, and it's very similar to the complement of a state verb. I can give you some examples of state verbs like seem, appear, look, and these do not have actions. They just show the state of something. An example of this would be the room feels cold, and after state verbs, we normally use an adjective or a prepositional phrase. In this case, I've used an adjective. You can use as if or as though after these verbs, like it feels as if or as though it is winter. And the difference is that in the first one, we use an adjective directly after the state verb, but in the second one, we have to write a complete clause with a subject, it, and a verb, is, or any other subject and verb. The point is that we have to use a clause. And I've already mentioned in my other videos that a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a finite verb, a verb that has a tense and an aspect. It feels like winter has come, and this is pretty much like as if and as though. It's kind of winter has not come, but it feels like it, so it is using the same structure like a complement of a state verb. You already have seen the use of as for comparison, like Sarah is as tall as Amanda, for example. You can use the same structure as a subordinate conjunction right before a dependent adverbial clause. Here, the questions were as difficult as you told me. And if you want to use it in negative structure, the questions were not so difficult as you told me, you have to change the first as into so. The next group of words or subordinate conjunctions are used to talk about the reason or the cause of the action or the state of the verb in the main clause. Because the company is making money more than ever, the board has decided to open a new office in a major city. Now, in this example, the adverbial clause is used at the beginning of the sentence before the main clause, so we have to use a comma to separate it from the main clause. But you should be already familiar with this. The only point that I want to mention here is that in some languages, because is not considered a subordinate conjunction. So you can make a sentence an independent clause that has because at the beginning of it. And I've seen a lot of people whose first language is not English have done this in their writing. They just write the main clause, put a full stop, and then write the dependent clause or the adverbial clause and then put a full stop right after that. This is not how it works in English, so you have to treat this always as a dependent or adverbial clause. Instead of because, you can use as, and this as can be a little bit confusing. We keep seeing this. We have seen this used as the subordinate conjunction for time, or the process of change, and then we have seen this for the reason here, and this can confuse some people, but don't worry about this. The context or the meaning of the sentence should clearly show you what this means. The good news is that all of these are used in the same structure. That is, in all cases, as makes a clause dependent. So in this case, we are making adverbial clauses, and in all cases, this is just making an adverbial clause. But the meaning is different, and that's the only thing you should pay attention to. So as a company is making money more than ever, the board has decided to open a new office in a major city. Is pretty much the same as the first sentence. Other words are like since and while and as. And I have put these three together because they share something else. They're different from because. They are indicating two things at the same time, especially in this sentence. The first thing that they're indicating is the time of the action. It says that the action or the state of the main clause is happening at the same time as the action or the state of the dependent clause. So we are here is happening at the same time or before or after buying some decorations here. In addition to the time aspect, it also adds the reason or the cause. So it's kind of saying that while we are here means at the time that we are here, and it also means that because we are here. So for the reason that we are here and while at the same time we are here, we should buy some decorations for Isla's birthday party. A very similar phrase to these three words, as, since, and while, is now that. And it is less formal, but it simply is the same. It basically has the same meaning. That is, it shows both the time relevance with the main clause and also the reason or the cause. There are two other words that are used for reason and cause of something, but they're very formal. One of them is for, and the other one is in that. So these two examples both indicate a very similar structure to the other sentences on this slide. And they are making an adverbial clause, and they indicate the reason for the action or the state of the main clause or the sentence that is in black. So we should start researching online classes more, for the pandemic seems to be here to stay for some time. Now, you can think of the cause as the precedent of the main clause. That is, first the cause happens and then the action or the state of the main clause happens. So this is how things work in this world. The cause happens and it creates an effect. If you want to focus on the cause, we can use these words and these structures. But if you want to focus on the result, you can use these words and these structures. One example would be, I will keep the car running so that it is warm when we get back from the store. And that is in parentheses, means that you can drop that. It is optional. Now you can turn this into a structure similar to what we saw here, but you have to make some changes. Remember, here, so that has attached itself to the result. And the cause now is in the main clause. If you wanted to use because with this sentence, or change the structure so that you can use because with this, it would be because I will keep the car running, it will stay warm when we get back from the store, something in those lines. Instead of so that, you can also use in order that, and they're exactly the same. Both of these indicate a result. In some books, you see that these structures that I've indicated with an orange color, they are also considered an adverbial clause. But I don't think they are adverbial clauses simply because they do not have a finite verb. Remember, a clause needs to have a finite verb, but the verb in all of these dependent clauses are in infinitive form. So to keep is the verb of the dependent clause. And in order to keep, again, the verb is in the infinitive form. And for this reason, I do not consider these adverbial clauses. If you do, it's fine, completely fine. And if you are aware of these structures, that's really good. But it's just my personal opinion that these should not be considered adverbial clauses. Now, there are some words or some subordinate conjunctions like these, although, though, and even though, that are used for contrast. The most common word or connector that people use for contrast is but. In this example, Andrew knew about the accident, but he did not tell the police about it. It's perfectly fine. You can use this, but remember, when you use but is not a subordinate conjunction, so it does not create a dependent clause. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this. This is a completely different topic. I just use this because I know that people commonly use but to indicate contrast. I can use although, even though, and though to say the same sentence, but I have to make some changes. If you look at the first sentence in which I've used but attaches itself to kind of the result clause. But when you use even though and though, you kind of attach it to the condition clause or something that happens first. So even though or although Andrew knew about the accident, he did not tell the police about it. Instead of even though and although, you can use while and whereas. Remember, while was used before to indicate time or create a period of time, and here it has a different meaning, and it is used for contrast. So you should be able to tell which is which based on the meaning of a sentence. And there are two more words and phrases that we can use exactly like even though and although, and these are in spite of the fact that and despite. The first one is pretty long, and that is partly because we have to add the fact that, because the actual phrase is in spite of, but we cannot use it alone before a clause. In spite of is like a preposition, and the best thing we can do is use a noun phrase or a gerund or ing form of the verb. But here, because we want to use a clause, we add this phrase, the fact that, so that we are able to use an actual clause here. If you don't like that, and if you think it is really long, you can use despite. So despite Andrew knew about the accident, he did not tell the police about it. And finally, we have a group of subordinate conjunctions that are used to indicate condition. As I said before, conditional sentences require a more detailed explanation, but here I'm just going to focus on the aspect that is related to adverbial clauses. In a different video, I'm going to explain how conditional sentences are made and what the different tenses do in different parts of a conditional sentence. But for now, let's take a look at some examples. If the mechanic were more honest, he wouldn't change a part that was already working. You can see the similarity with all the other adverbial clauses that you've seen up to this moment. We have a subordinate conjunction, which is if, and then we have a clause, the mechanic were more honest, and this is an adverbial clause, and it attaches itself to an independent clause. Now you can swap these and put the if part right after the independent clause part, and then you wouldn't need that comma there, and I've mentioned that before. And you might ask, why is a conditional sentence considered an adverbial clause? Well, first of all, the conditional sentence is not an adverbial clause. A conditional sentence has an adverbial clause as one part of it. So the blue part here is the adverbial clause of it. And it kind of describes the conditions under which the action of the main clause, in this case changing or not changing the perfectly working part, is about. So it kind of describes the conditions under which this main verb happens or this main action happens. And that is what adverbial clauses do. They talk about the conditions or the quality or the time and time of the action or the state of the main clause. In a formal situation, you can use provided that instead of if, and everything else is basically the same. Provided that the mechanic is honest, he won't change a part that is already working. Unless is also a kind of a subordinate conjunction that creates a conditional sentence. But the meaning is opposite to if. So unless is pretty similar to if not. So if I wanted to have the same meaning as the first sentence, I would have to change the second part into a positive sentence or an affirmative sentence. So unless the mechanic is honest, he may change a part that is already working. So you can replace unless with if not. Like if the mechanic is not honest, he may change a part that is already working. Okay, that's the end of this video, and I hope this is useful. I tried to cover as much as possible about adverbial clauses and show you some examples. But as I said, this is just an introduction. And most of these do not need any further explanation except for the conditional sentences or the subordinate conjunctions that are used to create adverbial clauses of condition. And also there is another topic that is out of the scope of this video, and that is reduced adverbial clauses, for which I'm going to make a video in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button so that it is more visible to more people like you, so that they can also watch these videos and use them. Thank you.